Three of Europe's most powerful leaders have been in London to sign what's now being called the boldest trilateral reset since the end of World War II. About 17 joint defense and energy projects were signed within 168 hours. Could this be another trio world power emerging? While global eyes stay fixed on the war in Ukraine and diplomatic dead ends in Gaza, a shift is quietly taking place right in the heart of Europe. After years of tension, the UK, France, and Germany are finally finding a common ground again. This time outside the EU, NATO, and anyone's expectations. So what's really behind this sudden reunion? In this video, we'll explore what is bringing these three powerful nations back together and why now. Let's get started. On the 9th of July 2025, British Prime Minister Keir Starmer welcomed President Emmanuel Macron of France for an official state visit to London. It was the first state visit by a French president since 2008, and it came at a time when global headlines were focused elsewhere. But right inside Downing Street, something big was quietly unfolding. Just days after Macron's visit, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz also arrived in London as well. Merz, who became Germany's Chancellor in January 2025 after a tight election victory over Olaf Scholz's Social Democrats, his first significant diplomatic move was to sign the Kensington Treaty with Starmer on July 17, 2025. The agreement instantly drew comparisons to France and Germany's historic Élysée and Aachen treaties, but this one was different. It didn't just focus on the UK-Germany axis, it also openly named France as a partner for future cooperation. In less than 2 weeks, London has hosted two of Europe's most influential leaders, and behind the photo ops were concrete agreements being made. Starmer, Macron, and Merz weren't just talking about European solidarity. They were talking about missiles, migrants, energy, and many other issues. Their statements, while diplomatic, were uncharacteristically pointed. Merz openly declared that Europe could no longer rely solely on the United States' protection. Macron echoed the same sentiment, stating that Europe needed strategic autonomy now more than ever. The meetings brought back to life what used to be known as the E3 format. After Brexit in 2016, the group drifted apart, with London pulling back from its EU defence coordination amidst rising bilateral tensions. One of the primary reasons for this renewed alliance is the world's changing threat map. The Iran-Israel conflict, which escalated in early 2025 with rocket strikes across Israel and oil tanker seizures in the Strait of Hormuz, has made the European continent more vulnerable to energy shocks and an influx of refugees. Meanwhile, Iran's nuclear program is once again in the spotlight. Intelligence briefings leaked back in June 2025 showed that Tehran has resumed its uranium enrichment activities near weapons-grade levels. That same week, the E3 signaled its intent to resume nuclear negotiations that would be separate from any American-led effort. This marks a significant return to form for the group, which had helped shape the original Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015 before the US withdrew under President Trump's first term. So what does this mean moving forward? Are we seeing the start of a new bloc? Or is this just a convenient alliance shaped by the moment? The honest answer begins with all the treaties that had quietly tied this triangle together for decades. And that's where we head next. The revival of the E3 alliance in 2025 didn't just appear out of nowhere. It's built on decades-long signed agreements that quietly wove a strong fabric of cooperation between the UK, France, and Germany. While each of these treaties were initially bilateral, together they form the foundation of what is quickly becoming a de facto alliance. The oldest of these is the Élysée Treaty, which was signed on January 22, 1963, between France and West Germany. At the time, the goal was simple but profound: to end the rivalry that had fueled two world wars in the past. French President Charles de Gaulle and German Chancellor Konrad Adenauer stood together in Paris and committed their countries to regular consultation on foreign, security, and youth policy. The treaty created new educational exchange programs, joint cabinet meetings, and set the tone for a cooperative European future. That treaty was later updated in 2019 with the Aachen Treaty, signed by Emmanuel Macron and then Chancellor Angela Merkel. This agreement further deepened the cooperation on defense, climate, and foreign aid. Importantly, it also created a Franco-German Defense and Security Council, which still meets to this day. These two treaties form the core of the Franco-German engine for decades. Across the Channel, the Lancaster House Treaties were signed on November 2, 2010, between the UK and France. These agreements, signed by David Cameron and Nicolas Sarkozy, included both countries' commitment to shared military facilities, joint nuclear testing technologies under strict international law, and even the creation of a combined joint expeditionary force. But perhaps the most consequential treaty to emerge this year is the Kensington Treaty, signed on July 17, 2025, between UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. What makes the Kensington Treaty especially notable is that it's a bilateral treaty that explicitly mentions a third party. In Article 2, the UK and Germany commit to intensifying trilateral cooperation with the French Republic. In diplomatic terms, this is rare because bilateral treaties don't usually reference other nations, especially not as collaborators. This language, however, signals a deliberate and conscious effort to institutionalize the E3, even if informally. And now, with each country bringing its own set of agreements into the triangle, they're finding ways to stitch them together into something more unified. France's deep defense links with Germany, the UK's long-standing nuclear and expeditionary ties with France, and now the UK-Germany blueprint for forward-facing projects. These are all instructions for how Europe's three powerhouses can now function as a single unit, even while sitting outside the same political club. But if these treaties built the frame, what holds the triangle together now is something far more immediate: the threats they face in common. So far, global events have increasingly become unstable. Ukraine's war with Russia has dragged on to its fourth year with no clear resolution in sight. The Israel-Gaza conflict had also created an overwhelming humanitarian crisis across the Middle East. And with Iran once again ramping up its uranium enrichment efforts, fears of a renewed nuclear standoff are becoming harder to ignore. In the middle of all of this, one of the most apparent signs of the E3's renewed cooperation can be seen in how they've taken the lead in Ukraine-related defense support. While NATO remains the formal umbrella, it's the UK and Germany that currently co-chair the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, more commonly referred to as the Ramstein Group. This group is responsible for coordinating the delivery of weapons, military training, and logistics to Kiev, holding strategic meetings at Ramstein Air Base in Germany and virtually through NATO and G7 channels. As of April 2025, both Britain and Germany had sent advanced anti-air systems and heavy armored vehicles as part of a wider support package to Ukraine. France, while not a leading arms supplier in the early phases of the war, has now joined by contributing long-range drone systems and medical evacuation teams. Both France and the UK are in talks to prepare a peacekeeping framework under a coalition of the willing model, to be deployed only if a formal ceasefire is achieved. Beyond Ukraine, the E3 are also stepping back into nuclear diplomacy. In June 2025, all three countries confirmed they would resume nuclear talks with Iran. The move is historically significant because this same group, back in the early 2000s, led the negotiations that eventually produced the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in 2015. However, Germany, under Chancellor Merz, has since been particularly focused on addressing Europe's nuclear dependency. Speaking in Berlin in February, Merz stated that it's no longer reasonable for Europe to depend entirely on American deterrence when the United States' political mood remains unpredictable. He proposed the idea of a shared nuclear responsibility within Europe that would not be through NATO alone. Though France and the UK are the only two nuclear powers in the EU area, Germany has long been a part of NATO's nuclear sharing agreement. Now, discussions are emerging once again about how Berlin can increase its role by contributing to early warning systems, cyber protection for nuclear infrastructure. The E3 nations are also coordinating on non-military security issues, many of which are just as urgent. Cybersecurity, for example, has become a growing concern. In January 2025, both Germany and France reported widespread phishing and ransomware attacks that were targeting their energy infrastructures. British intelligence later confirmed that these were linked to state-sponsored hacker groups, with suspicions pointing towards Russia and Iran. On the migration front, the UK and France introduced a joint treaty earlier that was aimed at managing the Channel's illegal crossing routes via small boats. A new returns framework, agreed when Macron visited London, allows both countries to send migrants back to the first country of departure under a system similar to the EU's old Dublin regulation. Germany, facing its migration pressure through southern and eastern Europe, has since signed on to coordinate asylum processing standards and share data on trafficking networks. Then there's the coordination of sanctions. As the United States issued new sets of sanctions on Iran in early 2025, all three nations acted faster than the EU as a body. On January 22nd, all three nations issued announcements freezing the assets of 5 Iranian banks accused of funding proxy militias in Syria and Lebanon, and also blocking shipping firms suspected of violating the arms embargo placed on Russia. While these actions don't replace the EU or NATO, they seem to be proving that Europe's top 3 military and economic powers can coordinate outside the EU when needed. But this newfound harmony didn't happen easily. In fact, just a few years ago, the E3 alliance barely existed at all in practice. And to understand how far they've come, we need to take a closer look at the difficult road that brought them back together. The current wave of cooperation between the UK, France, and Germany feels promising and natural. But the truth is, just a few years ago, That relationship was defined more by frustration and political tension than unity. The Brexit referendum in June 2016 marked the beginning of a breakdown in trust, particularly between London and Paris, and eventually Berlin. After the referendum result shocked much of Europe, Germany's Der Spiegel famously ran a cover pleading, "Please don't go." But despite that emotional appeal, the UK pushed forward and officially left the EU in January 2020. This left a gap in Europe's foreign policy coordination and created deep uncertainty around how Britain would engage with its old partners. Relations between the UK and France soured, most visibly when France threatened to cut the UK and Jersey energy supply over fishing rights in the English Channel and around Jersey's waters. Then came the migrant crisis in the Channel. Hundreds of small boats were making the dangerous crossing from France to southern England. This made the UK accuse France of not doing enough to stop them. But France insisted that Britain was shirking its responsibility. Back in 2021, the British Home Secretary even suggested deploying some naval vessels to stop the crossings. This became a move that the French government called unacceptable and provocative. Meanwhile, the UK's relationship with Germany became colder, though less publicly confrontational. Trade between the two countries suffered. Industries in Germany, particularly car manufacturers and logistics firms, complained about new customs delays and uncertainty over standards. The political tone in Berlin was also shifting, with Chancellor Olaf Scholz expressing a lukewarm interest in rebuilding ties with Britain during his time in office. Part of the problem was that Scholz and Macron didn't agree on much either. From 2022 to 2024, tensions between France and Germany also increased, especially over energy policy. Scholz was slow to support Ukraine with heavy weapons, while Macron pushed for deeper EU defense integration. However, the turning point came in January 2025, when Friedrich Merz became Germany's chancellor after surviving a historic vote failure as the leader of the Christian Democratic Union. Unlike Scholz, Merz was more openly Atlanticist in tone, but also strongly supportive of European strategic autonomy. He quickly moved to mend fences with France and to reset ties with Britain. His first international trip was to Paris, where he and Macron reopened lines of dialogue on both countries' energy and defense. His second stop? London. The UK, now under the leadership of Prime Minister Keir Starmer, has also changed course. Starmer, elected in 2024, had promised to reset relations with Europe without rejoining the EU. His approach has been less confrontational and more diplomatic. He quickly moved to build the UK's confidence, including reviving cross-channel military talks and greenlighting shared infrastructure discussions. And now that the relationship is working again, they're starting to ask, how can this triangle serve not just their countries, but the whole of Europe? At a glance, it may seem odd that Europe's three most influential nations are choosing to coordinate some of their most sensitive foreign policy efforts outside the structures of the European Union. After all, France and Germany remain key EU members, and the bloc already has official foreign policy tools. From the European External Action Service to the EU Council of Foreign Ministers, the E3 structure enables the group to move faster than the EU, particularly on urgent foreign policy matters that require swift and unified messaging. In recent months, this flexibility has made all the difference. When it came to responding to Iran's uranium enrichment activities in mid-2025, the E3 was able to agree on a negotiating position and prepare for diplomatic engagement within days. The E3, in this sense, doesn't replace the EU. It works around it, filling the space where the Union sometimes struggles to act decisively. It also bridges gaps with other alliances, particularly NATO and the G7. While NATO remains the cornerstone of European defense, it is transatlantic by nature, meaning the United States, Canada, and Turkey all play significant roles in it too. That means European voices sometimes get delayed by the broader scope of NATO's responsibilities. The E3, by focusing only on a UK-France-Germany coordination, can prioritize European interests first, then present a united front within its larger frameworks. At the same time, the G7 is a powerful platform for economic coordination, but not all of its members share the same security risks or geographical realities. Japan and Canada, for instance, have different regional concerns. That leaves the space for a group like the E3 alliance to translate global decisions into European strategy. In the case of the enforcement of sanctions, energy policy, or military deployments, the E3 could act as the engine room behind broader Western actions. This coordination isn't just functional, but also political. With the UK no longer in the EU, many question whether it should still have a role in shaping the continent's strategic agenda. The E3 answers that question clearly, and by working with Germany and France on joint defense projects, diplomatic positions, and long-term energy plans, the UK proves it can remain a key European power without needing to sit at the EU table. And for Germany and France, the arrangement also helps them avoid some of the bureaucratic roadblocks inside the EU. In the past, efforts to create a European army, intensify shared intelligence, or enforce a standard migration policy have stalled due to the resistance from smaller member states or internal disagreements. The E3 allows Berlin and Paris to pursue these ideas with a trusted partner and act as a testing ground before proposing wider adoption. The E3's value, then, lies in its ability to act quickly, set examples, and create momentum, which is what makes it Europeans' latest quiet power core. But power comes with pressure. Underneath the handshakes and treaties lies a more challenging question: can it last? One of the most apparent challenges lies in the UK's historical alignment with the United States. While Britain is now pursuing closer coordination with France and Germany, it still relies heavily on US intelligence, military technology, and global diplomatic weight. If future American administrations, especially under a change in leadership, begin to pull the UK in different directions, tensions could quickly emerge between London and its European partners. Meanwhile, in Germany, Chancellor Friedrich Merz has made it clear that he supports stronger European defense cooperation. But when it comes to fiscal issues, especially EU debt sharing or significant defense funds, Berlin tends to resist much. Merz's government, which fiscally conservative voters back, has ruled out company tax and joint borrowing in the EU budget. This could become a source of disagreement with France, which has long supported more integrated European financial instruments to support defense and infrastructure. Looking beyond the trio, there's also the question of whether the E3 will stay exclusive or begin to expand its network. Countries like Poland, Sweden, and the Baltic states have already expressed interest in being involved in discussions around defense and Eastern European strategy. Some EU insiders have floated the idea of a flexible E3 plus format where the core trio leads, but other member states join on specific topics. This could increase the group's reach but also risk reducing its speed and unity. Despite these tensions, the leadership of France, the UK, and Germany remains one of the few places in European diplomacy where action speaks louder than speeches. The challenge now is not just to survive the next crisis, but to shape the future that comes after it. Thank you for watching. Do you think this pact is the start of absolute trust or just another headline? Let us know in the comment section. Ensure to hit the like button, share this video, and subscribe to our channel for more insightful analysis. See you in the next video.